Hey heroes, and welcome to another sinister episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an amount of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelate. The link is in the description below, along with other places you can find me. From Doctor Doom to the Red Skull to the Green Goblin, the Marvel Universe has no shortage of imposing villains to battle the Earth's mightiest heroes. Then there's the other guys, the various crooks, thieves, and mercenaries who are more likely to be seen getting a drink at the bar with no name than posing a legitimate threat to someone like Thor, for example. The kind of workaday criminals who are sometimes recruited by the likes of Justin Hammer or Parker Robbins to fill out the rank and file of their supervillain gangs. Today we're spotlighting just a few of these individuals who likely wouldn't warrant a full video of their own, but nonetheless have their place in the Marvel Universe. First, let's look at Dr. Gregor Szczepanka, a Hungarian scientist who moved to the United States and worked under Stark Industries, where he secretly obsessed over the idea of achieving immortality. He attempted to steal scientific secrets from Stark himself to help fund his private research, but was caught by Iron Man and subsequently fired. Tony decided not to press charges, remarking that Szczepanka should leave before he got cold feet about letting him go. Inspired, Szczepanka experimented with cryogenics and developed a method of using extreme cold to place living animals into suspended animation for days at a time without any negative side effects. Using similar principles, he created a specialized suit meant to slow his aging by regulating his body's temperature, but quickly devised a way to weaponize his design. With a costume capable of projecting intense cold and entrapping others within blocks of ice, Gregor Szczepanka went on a crime spree and was dubbed Jack Frost by the media before ultimately coming face to face with Iron Man once again. Suffice it to say, while Szczepanka's technology was effective against civilians, he was no match for Iron Man's weaponry and was swiftly defeated. He was sent to prison, but over the following months, he slowly and secretly rebuilt and modified his suit. Eventually escaping after years of incarceration and more powerful than ever, he rechristened himself Blizzard. He battled Iron Man once again, and while proving himself to be more of a threat, in the end he was, unsurprisingly, defeated for a second time. He briefly joined forces with Electro, and the two escaped from jail together, which led to a battle with Spider-Man and Daredevil. He was employed by the criminal industrialist Justin Hammer alongside Whiplash and Melter, and he even clashed with the Incredible Hulk during a time in which he temporarily gained the ability to use his freezing powers without his suit. While he narrowly survived that encounter, Blizzard ultimately met his end at the hands of Arno Stark, a relative of Tony from a divergent timeline in which the Age of Heroes ended in the 1980s and the planet was completely taken over by megacorporations, but that's another topic entirely. The important thing for today is that Arno was the Iron Man of his home reality, Earth 8410, and when Blizzard saw him, he assumed that it was his old foe and attacked, only to be fatally struck down by a much more ruthless Iron Man. After the death of the original Blizzard, his former employer, Justin Hammer, had his scientists replicate Szczepanka's technology. Seeking an obedient and expendable pawn, Hammer gave the new Blizzard suit to a young yet unambitious criminal in his employ, Donnie Gill, who ironically went on to have a much more active career than his predecessor and has operated as Blizzard ever since. Next, let's turn our attention to a street tough named Johnny Horton. Originally born in Tacoma, Washington, Johnny spent time as a gangbanger in New Orleans, where he caught the attention of a man from Chicago who recruited him into the Secret Empire, a subversive organization that sought to take over the country. The Secret Empire promised to transform Horton into a legitimate supervillain and injected him with a bioadaptive genetic serum that allowed them to successfully graft animal parts onto his flesh, including wings and claws, transforming him into the Griffin. Although initially horrified by what he'd become, he followed orders when he was sent to attack the infamous Brand Corporation and was ultimately defeated by the mutant heroes, the Beast and the Angel. He was arrested and imprisoned, but continued to mutate, growing a tail and developing superhuman strength. Feigning illness, he waited for the authorities to attempt to operate and restore his humanity, taking this opportunity to escape. He accepted his monstrous new form, but nonetheless decided to strike back at his former masters, tracking down and murdering the surgeon who had transformed him, although by this point the leaders of the Secret Empire had already been defeated by Captain America and his allies. Over the following years, the Griffin continued to pop up and battled various heroes including Spider-Man, Wonder Man, Tigra, Namor, D-Man, Falcon, Captain America, and the Champions of Los Angeles. Amidst these battles, the Griffin has demonstrated the ability to evolve further in response to stress, but as his body became more animalistic, so too did his mind. In more recent years, he's regained his mental faculties somewhat and became one of many career supervillains to join the Hood's army, often returning to his employ. At some point he also sired a Puerto Rican daughter named Yo-Yo Rodriguez, who developed unique superhuman powers of her own. She had the ability to move at superhuman speeds, but whenever she did so, she would always snap back to where she was when she started. Taking the codename Slingshot, Rodriguez was recruited by another superhuman, Daisy Johnson, and joined a team of secret warriors led by Nick Fury. Next, let's look at a man named Peter Van Zante. Originally from Chicago, he enlisted in the U.S. Army and fought in a conflict in Southeast Asia, but was severely injured by an enemy rocket. He was airlifted out and brought to a hospital ship, but with a typhoon building outside, the doctors were unable to perform the necessary life-saving surgery, and elected to use an experimental cell stimulator to help keep him alive in the meantime. During this treatment, a lightning strike caused a power surge, fusing the machine's circuits and causing energy to flood Van Zante's body, linking him to the storm itself. He quickly made a full recovery, and doctors attempted to study his condition, but were unable to explain exactly what had happened, and ultimately released him, discharging him with a clean bill of health. However, Peter soon discovered that through some bizarre quirk of fate, he had been endowed with the ability to psionically control and manipulate water. Not wanting to be labeled an outcast, he kept this power secret for several years, unsure of what to do with it, until his ally, Jerry the Mole Molinsky, convinced him to start a life of crime. Thus, Peter Van Zante crafted a costumed identity and became the Water Wizard, a California-based criminal who used his watery constructs to steal a small fortune and earn some notoriety. However, things took a turn when a local mob boss known as the Enforcer hired the Water Wizard to eliminate the Ghost Rider. Now, one can certainly see the logic in sending a man who can manipulate water to kill an enemy who can throw flames, but suffice it to say that the Ghost Rider's supernatural hellfire proved too much for the Water Wizard, and while this was the first humiliating defeat the villain suffered, it would prove to be far from the last. In one instance, the Water Wizard allied with a magician named Moondark, who boosted his abilities, nearly allowing him to best their mutual foe, but when the Ghost Rider scorched Moondark's soul, forcing the mystic to flee, Van Zante's powers dropped back to their original levels, and he was easily bested once again. When the brutal vigilante known as the Scourge of the Underworld attacked the Bar with No Name and killed a total of 18 supervillains, the Water Wizard was the one who came upon the grisly scene after the fact and contacted Captain America about it. As luck would have it, the only reason that he wasn't a victim himself was because his car got a flat tire while he was on his way to the bar. There was later an incident in which Dr. Doom used an aggression enhancer device to provoke various villains into attacking the Fantastic Four, but upon arriving, the Water Wizard got into a tiff with another liquid-based criminal, Hydro Man, and the two wound up just fighting each other. Perhaps his most embarrassing defeat came when he plotted to attack Quasar and She-Hulk during the reconstruction of Avengers Mansion, and was thwarted not by any of the heroes, but by a construction worker named Percy Stevens, who took the Water Wizard unawares and kicked him into a puddle of wet cement before a fight could break out and cause any more damage. After all of that, Peter Van Zante was recruited by a group of ecological activists called Project Earth. While working with them, he was given a new costume and a new code name, henceforth becoming known as Aqueduct. As part of this deal, he joined a group called the Forces of Nature, each of whom represented a different classical element. His new teammates included Terraformer, a sentient vegetable simuloid created by the villainous Plant Man, Skybreaker, a rogue inhuman named Aereo who was previously loyal to Maximus the Mad, and Firewall, a Cambodian woman named Min Li Ng who was mutated by an experimental napalm compound deployed by the American military. Having found a new purpose, Aqueduct embraced Project Earth's ecological cause, and the forces of nature launched an attack on Brazilian land developers in an attempt to combat the deforestation in the Amazon rainforest. However, the group's willingness to terrorize and kill workers put them into conflict with the superhero team, the New Warriors, with Aqueduct ultimately being defeated by the Atlantean adventurer Namorita. The forces of nature later returned, albeit with Firewall replaced with Firebrand, the second Firebrand anyway, a former Stark International employee named Russ Broxtel, who stole the flame-producing battlesuit developed by Gary Gilbert, the original Firebrand, after Gilbert had been killed by the Scourge of the Underworld in his infamous attack on the Bar with No Name. During this time, the team attempted to intervene in an ongoing civil war in the Middle Eastern nation of Trans-Sabal, and ultimately joined forces with the New Warriors to help local rebels arrest and overthrow the dictator Jalfaha Dan. Although the last-minute Firebrand attempted to seize control of the country himself by assassinating Don while he was still in custody, but was thwarted by Nova and Namorita, the latter of which broke his arm for trying. Years later, the forces of nature were reassembled by Norman Osborn during the time in which he was the leader of the international peacekeeping agency Hammer, this time with the fire spot on the team going to a different superhuman, Sunstreak. Next, let's turn our attention to an eccentric woman named Lorena Dodson. Born into a wealthy family in Boston, Lorena was kept isolated as a child and raised primarily by nannies, teachers, and tutors who attempted to mold her into a polite and proper young lady. With no friends her own age, her only escape from this tedium was her library of books, and among them she had a particular affinity for the works of Lewis Carroll. Even as a young adult, she had little control over her own life and was married off to an elderly billionaire. Then, when she was 25 years old, Lorena killed her octogenarian husband and inherited his vast fortune. Feeling truly free for the first time, she sought to live a life of adventure and excitement, and became an eccentric Wonderland-inspired criminal known as the White Rabbit. With no regard for profit, she recruited a gang of thugs to join her in her crime spree and paid them well enough to overlook her dubious sanity. She employed a number of peculiar weapons, notably an umbrella that fired carrot-shaped projectiles. Having been forbidden from eating fast food as a child, she spent several weeks robbing various restaurants like the Quickie Burger until one heist was interrupted by an amateur superhero, the fabulous Frogman. Real name Eugene Patillo, Frogman was the son of Vincent Patillo, also known as the former costumed criminal Leapfrog, but perhaps that's a story for another day. Anyway, Frogman's encounter with the White Rabbit's gang nearly cost him his life, and he had to be rescued by his reluctant, more experienced ally, Spider-Man. While not exactly an Avengers-level threat, Dodson was clearly an unhinged danger to everyday citizens, and so Spider-Man and Frogman continued to pursue her. Meanwhile, Frogman's father seemingly returned to crime and joined the White Rabbit's gang. However, he was secretly working with the police and gathering evidence to be used in the case against her. In the end, the fabulous Frogman chased the White Rabbit until her jet boots malfunctioned, causing her to crash into a nearby building where she was subdued by a vase-brandishing university student named Roger Hochberg. Eager to take revenge on Frogman, who she up and decided was her arch-nemesis, Dodson later returned and joined forces with another villain the Rainine hero had bested, the Walrus. He was once a Brooklyn cab driver named Hubert Carpenter. However, his mad uncle, Humbert, used him as a test subject in his experiments for 11 years, bombarding him with various types of energy until he finally succeeded in endowing Hubert with superhuman strength. Initially unsure of which animal to name himself after, Carpenter eventually settled on the Walrus, in reference to the Beatles song, which fittingly itself was a reference to a Lewis Carroll poem. Despite his ridiculous appearance, the Walrus actually gained the upper hand over several experienced defenders, who underestimated their foes' strength and durability. However, his powers soon began to fade, and he lost consciousness soon after the Frogman started attacking, allowing Eugene to take credit for defeating him. After being restored to full strength, the Walrus helped the White Rabbit cause chaos with the goal of luring the Frogman out once again, although he was somewhat reluctant since he was more interested in profit than petty revenge. In any event, the White Rabbit was taken down by the clumsy antics of Frogman and Leapfrog, who had joined forces to form a father-son team, while Spider-Man quickly dealt with the actual superhuman threat, the Walrus. The White Rabbit has continued to pop up occasionally over the years, and while she is often defeated by Spider-Man, for those without superpowers, she is more dangerous than her whimsical appearance would suggest. She had a short-lived relationship with Arcade, another eccentric criminal who was born into wealth. She joined the Hood's supervillain army and participated in an attack on Mr. Negative's territory. She recruited other animal-themed villains to form a group called the Menagerie, although by this point the villainess, formerly known as Gypsy Moth, had changed her name to Skane, which threw off the whole motif. The White Rabbit subsequently joined an all-female supervillain syndicate assembled by the Beetle, Janice Lincoln, using her wealth to fund their activities, and later served directly under the Beetle's father, Lonnie Lincoln, aka Tombstone, as his primary enforcer. Okay, now let's look at a man named Jeff Hagges. Born in Duluth, Minnesota, Hagges was a talented engineer who worked for a defense contractor and designed missile propulsion systems. To deal with the stress of his position, he liked to unwind at a local pool hall, but things took a turn when he began to develop a gambling addiction that landed him in serious debt. When the company he worked for learned about this, they worried that he would sell defense secrets to pay his gambling debts, and fired him even without any definitive evidence of wrongdoing. Enraged and at the end of his rope, Hagges designed a weaponized pool cue that magnified the force applied to it over 1,000-fold, and became a costumed villain known as Eightball. He recruited a trio of henchmen and even designed and built a flying vehicle shaped like a ball rack. He went on a crime spree in New York and clashed with the extra-dimensional hero Sleepwalker on several occasions, evading capture more than once. He frequented the bar with no name, where he sometimes played pool with the supervillain juggler Oddball. At some point, he also started using his ill-gotten funds to help support his elderly grandmother. Later, he joined forces with several other criminals, Whirlwind, Humbug, and Freezerburn, and the foursome stole from the up-and-coming crime lord Celia Riccadonna. In response to this, Riccadonna put a bounty on all 4 men, and despite being found by the Daughters of the Dragon, Colleen Wing and Misty Knight, Eightball was soon killed by an RPG round fired by the Wrecker. He was later revived by the Hood, who sometimes used magic to resurrect dead supervillains to bolster his forces, but rather than join the Hood's army, Eightball cut and ran. More recently, he found himself confiding in the vigilante Moon Knight and ultimately decided to try and turn his life around, using his skills and technology to aid Moon Knight's charitable work at the Midnight Mission. Lastly for today, we have a man named Stephen Jamal Hudak, who had a promising career as a research chemist at a private company until one of his co-workers started embezzling funds and framed Hudak for it. Unable to convince the company of his innocence, he went on the run and became a fugitive, ultimately using his scientific acumen to create a flame-throwing battlesuit. Dubbing himself the Scorcher, he became an armored mercenary, assembled a strike squad clad in fireproof costumes, and was hired by Norman Osborn to steal experimental designs from rival companies. This was after the chemical accident that physically enhanced Osborn, but before he actually made his costume debut as the Green Goblin. The Scorcher's crimes soon put him into conflict with a young Spider-Man who ultimately bested the villain. Believing that he had no choice but to continue his life of crime and blaming everyone but himself for his circumstances, the Scorcher escaped from custody and, now lacking Osborn's support, started his own protection racket. He operated beneath a service station in downtown Manhattan, which he used as a front for his activities, and hired a teenager named Tiny McKeever to work there. But because of this, Hudak was soon found again by Spider-Man, who was actually Tiny's classmate in his civilian identity of Peter Parker. With an assist from Tiny, Spider-Man again defeated the Scorcher, who fled despite his damaged fuel tanks and narrowly escaped while his battlesuit exploded. Hudak laid low for years, not resurfacing until the latter portion of the Clone Saga, after Peter Parker's clone, Ben Reilly, took over as Spider-Man for a time. At some point amidst all of this, he was estranged from his now ex-wife Callie and young son Lucas, who grew up not knowing his father, although Hudak later made efforts to reconnect. In the meantime, he was recruited into a version of the Masters of Evil assembled by Justine Hammer, aka the Crimson Cowl, daughter of the, by this point, deceased Justin Hammer. This group tried to extort the world's governments by manipulating the weather, but were thwarted by Hawkeye's Thunderbolts team. The Scorcher was also one of many tech-based villains to receive equipment and/or upgrades from the genius inventor Phineas Mason, aka the Tinkerer, during a time in which the Latvian Prime Minister Lucia von Bardis was directly funding American criminals. When Von Bardis later conscripted those she bankrolled into a battle with Nick Fury and other heroes, the Scorcher was hospitalized in the conflict, and after Von Bardis was defeated, Hudak expressed a desire to go straight. However, he subsequently skipped out on his bail hearing and had to be apprehended once again by She-Hulk. Since then, he's continued to fall back into bad habits, allying with the Hood's army during Norman Osborn's dark reign, and is a prime example of the kind of C-list villain that can be found filling out the rank and file of that kind of group. Alrighty, that is all I have for you this week, but thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you'll get your name in these special thanks, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. That being said, if there's anything in particular that you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you this week, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!